He said it loud enough for the whole terminal to hear. Kung Fu is a fantasy. Put a real grappler in front of you, and you'll fold in 10 seconds. Nobody in that airport that afternoon expected the small man, reading quietly in the corner, to stand up and say 4 words back. Show me. I'm listening. What happened in the next 7 seconds would be talked about by everyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. Not because a man got thrown to the ground, but because of what he chose to do with him once he was there. This is that story. A Friday afternoon, a waiting room. The gate area was the kind of place where nobody looks at anybody. Rows of hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A vending machine humming in the corner. The metallic drone of a boarding announcement nobody was quite listening to. Outside the tall windows, the tarmac shimmered with heat, and somewhere out past the taxiway a plane was taxiing toward a runway that would take it somewhere far from here. A man sat near the window, dressed simply, dark trousers, a plain jacket folded over the seat beside him, a small leather bag at his feet. He wasn't doing anything remarkable. He was reading, occasionally underlining something in the margin of a well-worn paperback, glancing up every so often the way people do when they're waiting for a flight and have nowhere better to put their attention. He was small, maybe 5'7", maybe 140 pounds, soaking wet. Nothing about him screamed fighter. If you'd walked past him in that terminal, you might have thought he was a graduate student, or a musician, or someone's quiet uncle killing time before a connection, which was, in a way, exactly the point. A few people in the gate area recognized him. A ripple of murmurs passed a couple of rows back. Is it that the guy from the movies, the martial arts one? But nobody approached. There's a kind of unspoken etiquette in a crowded public space. You notice, you whisper, and then you leave the man to his book. He had, in fact, been up since before dawn. 2 hours of forms in an empty gym, an hour on the bag, a session of slow, deliberate stretching that looked almost meditative from a distance. None of that showed on him now. That was, in its own way, part of the discipline. The visible calm was not an absence of effort, but the far side of it. The place effort goes once it's been repeated so many thousands of times that it no longer announces itself. To everyone around him in that gate area, he simply looked like a tired traveler with good posture, killing an hour before a flight. That etiquette lasted until a man in a white training uniform walked in. The man who never lost. He came through the gate area like weather. You felt him before you saw him. 6'2", maybe 210 pounds. Built the way serious grapplers get built. Thick through the shoulders and neck. Dense rather than showy. The kind of frame that comes from throwing full-grown men onto mats for 15 years running. He was still in his training whites. The belt around his waist faded from black to a soft, well-earned gray at the knot. The mark of a man who had put in real hours, not a costume borrowed for the occasion. He had a gym bag over one shoulder and the loose, confident gait of someone who had never once had to make room for anybody else in a crowded room. People made room for him. He was, by any honest account, good. Genuinely good. A 6-degree black belt doesn't happen by accident. It happens through a decade and a half of getting thrown, learning to fall, learning to throw back, competing, losing, adjusting, and winning far more than you lose. He'd placed at regional championships. He taught 2 nights a week at a dojo across town, where a wall of faded photographs traced his career from a skinny teenager in his first white belt to the broad-shouldered instructor he'd become. Whatever else was about to happen, it would not happen to an amateur. There was something else underneath the confidence, though. Something that had been building in him for longer than this particular afternoon. He had watched, over the past year, as a new kind of martial arts philosophy climbed out of the movie theaters and into everyday conversation. A philosophy that seemed to delight in tearing down exactly the kind of structure he had spent his adult life building. Styles are cages, the interviews said. Forms are training wheels for people who never learned to ride. Every time he read another headline like that, something in him tightened. 15 years of discipline, of drilling the same throw 10,000 times until it stopped being a technique and became a reflex. Was all of that supposed to be a limitation now? Was the thing he'd given his 20s to actually just an elaborate cage he hadn't noticed closing around him? He didn't have language for that discomfort. What he had, walking into that gate area and recognizing the small man by the window, was an opportunity to settle it the only way he knew how. Not with an argument, but with a mat, or in this case, with a stretch of terminal carpet that would have to do. He clocked the small man by the window almost by accident. A double take, then a longer look, then recognition solidifying into something harder around the eyes. He knew the face. Everyone did, a little by then. The fast hands, the philosophy interviews, the growing reputation of a martial art that broke every rule the traditionalists had spent their careers enforcing. And something about that reputation had been sitting wrong with him for a long time. Kung Fu doesn't work. He didn't walk over quietly. He walked over the way a man walks when he's already decided what he's going to say and just needs an audience for it. You're Bruce Lee. Not a question. A statement, delivered like an accusation. The man with the book looked up, unhurried, and closed it over one finger to keep his place. That's right. I've seen your demonstrations. The judo man's voice was pitched to carry, not quite a shout, but loud enough that the businessman 2 rows back lowered his newspaper, that the woman with a coffee cup paused mid-sip. Fast hands. Nice choreography, but it's theater. It wouldn't survive 10 seconds against a real grappler. Judo. Wrestling. Something with contact, with resistance, with rules that don't let you dance out of range. A few heads turned. The gate area, which had been humming with its usual low static of departures and arrivals, went quieter by degrees, the way a room does when people sense they might be about to witness something. Bruce set the book down on the empty seat beside him. He didn't stand yet. He just looked at the bigger man for a long moment, not with anger, not with the flash of wounded pride you might expect, but with something closer to careful attention, the look of someone reading a person rather than reacting to them. Because here was the thing he understood immediately, the thing that took the sting out of the insult before it could land. This wasn't really about him. This was about a man who had given 15 years of his life to a discipline he loved, watching a new philosophy rise in the public imagination that seemed to say your rules don't matter. Your structure is optional. Everything you built your identity around is negotiable. That's not an easy thing to sit with. Fear dressed up as certainty will always talk the loudest. You're very good at what you do, Bruce said finally, his voice even, almost gentle. Your stance, walking over here, perfect distribution, hands ready, feet set. Whoever taught you well. The compliment seemed to catch the bigger man off guard. He'd expected an argument. He'd half expected the smaller man to simply look away, embarrassed, and let the moment pass. Then you know I'm not wrong, he pressed. Grab me. Right now. Prove it doesn't work. A pause. Bruce hadn't moved from his seat yet, hadn't so much as shifted his weight, and the stillness of it seemed to unsettle the bigger man more than an argument would have. He'd expected heat. He'd expected either a flustered denial or a puffed-up acceptance, some visible sign that his words had landed the way he'd intended them to land. Instead, he got quiet attention, the specific kind of attention a doctor gives a set of symptoms, not personal. Not defensive, just observant. You don't have to do this to prove anything to me, Bruce said. I already believe you're skilled. I watched you cross this room. Whoever taught you your footwork taught you something real. I don't want your compliments. The words came out sharper than he'd planned, edged with the particular embarrassment of being read so easily by someone he'd walked over to provoke. I want you to prove your art works against something that isn't cooperating with you. Bruce studied him another moment, unhurried, the way he'd study a locked door before deciding whether it needed force or patience. Then, finally, he set the book down. The space clears itself. A businessman nearby said something about maybe not doing this here. Nobody listened. A gate agent glanced over from the counter, uncertain whether this was the kind of thing that required intervention or the kind of thing best left alone. Passengers who'd been half asleep in their chairs were sitting up now, angling for a better view. The particular electricity of a public space, sensing an unscripted moment, had taken hold, and nobody wanted to be the one who missed it. Bruce stood, not with any drama, the same unhurried economy he'd used to close his book, and set his jacket over the back of the chair. All right, he said. Show me. The judo man dropped his gym bag, and the space around them cleared itself the way water finds the shape of a container. A loose oval of onlookers, 30 or 40 people now. Phones forgotten. Gate numbers forgotten. The boarding announcement crackling unheard overhead. He settled into a proper stance, knees bent, weight low, hands up and open, ready to close distance and find a grip. Textbook. The stance of a man who had drilled the same fundamentals 10,000 times until his body no longer needed his mind's permission to execute them. Bruce didn't mirror him. He stood the way he'd been sitting a moment earlier, loose, upright, hands relaxed at his sides, weight centered. To anyone trained in a formal system, it looked less like readiness and more like an afterthought. That was, as it would turn out, an illusion that lasted exactly as long as it took the bigger man to move. "Put your hands up," the judo man said, almost annoyed by how little his opponent seemed to be taking this seriously. "I don't need to," Bruce said quietly. 7 seconds. What happened next took less time to happen than it will take you to read this paragraph. The bigger man closed the distance fast, faster than his size suggested he'd be able to. The kind of explosive first step you only get from years of live sparring against people trying just as hard to throw you first. His right hand shot forward for the lapel of Bruce's jacket, the opening move of 100 different throws, the setup that had ended 100 different matches in his favor. His hand never closed on anything solid. Bruce's own hand met his wrist mid-flight, not a block, not a slap. Something quieter and more precise. A redirection that took the incoming grip and simply declined to be there for it. In the same motion, before the bigger man's balance had a chance to catch up with the sudden absence of resistance, a second contact, light, almost a tap, found the inside of his elbow, and his arm, which a heartbeat earlier had felt like an unstoppable piece of machinery, folded slightly against its own momentum. He tried to reset. There wasn't time. Bruce had already stepped, not backward, not away, but off at an angle, onto a line the bigger man's whole 15 years of training had never asked him to defend, because nobody in a GI ever attacked from there. The judo man's own forward momentum, the thing that should have carried him into a clean throw, carried him instead into empty space. A foot swept his lead leg at the exact half second his weight had committed to it. Not with force, just with timing. The way you don't need to push over something that's already falling. His feet left the ground he'd been standing on for 2 straight decades of training, and for one suspended instant, 40 strangers in an airport gate area watched a 6-degree black belt become, very simply, a body in the air. He landed on his back on the terminal carpet, not hard. A hand at his shoulder had guided the fall. The same unhurried economy, controlling his descent as had controlled everything else in the last 7 seconds, but landed all the same, with a knee resting lightly at his chest and an open hand hovering, not touching, an inch from his throat. The gate area was completely silent. Someone's coffee cup had stopped halfway to their mouth. A child who'd been playing with a toy car on the floor had frozen mid-motion, staring. The gate agent had one hand on the radio at her hip and hadn't yet decided whether to use it. 7 seconds, beginning to end. A man who had never lost a real confrontation in 15 years of serious training had just lost one without landing a single technique. "Do you yield?" Bruce's voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only the man beneath him could hear it clearly. "Do you yield?" The bigger man lay there for a long moment, chest rising and falling, not from exertion. The whole exchange had barely raised his pulse, but from something closer to shock. His face had gone through 3 expressions in as many seconds: disbelief, something like anger, and now, settling underneath both, a kind of dawning, uncomfortable clarity. "Yes," he said finally, quietly. All the projection had gone out of his voice. Bruce released the position immediately and stood, stepping back 3 full paces, hands open and visible. The universal grammar of this is over. There's no danger here, and extended a hand down to help the other man up. The bigger man looked at the offered hand for a beat too long before he took it. He came up unsteady, not from any injury, but from the particular vertigo of having an entire worldview readjusted in under 10 seconds. He opened his mouth to say something, and nothing came out. The conversation nobody expected. They sat, eventually, not in the crowd spotlight anymore, but off to the side, near the window, while the gate area slowly exhaled and went back to being an ordinary Friday afternoon. The gate agent had decided, correctly, that nothing here required security. A few onlookers lingered, trying to look like they weren't still listening. "How?" the judo man finally managed. "Did you do that?" I've thrown men bigger than me. I've competed against black belts from 3 countries. I didn't even see the wrist grip fail. Bruce considered the question seriously, the way he considered most questions, as though it deserved a real answer rather than a quick one. Your art is excellent, he said. Everything you did was correct. Your stance, your entry, your grip, textbook. The problem wasn't your technique. It's that you trained it against people who were playing the same game you were playing. Same rules, same expectations, same shape of exchange. I didn't give you that shape. I wasn't there to be gripped. So Kung Fu beats Judo? No. Bruce shook his head, and there was no triumph in it, only patience. That's not what happened here, and it's not what I believe. Grappling is real. Distance, timing, off-balancing. Your discipline understands all of that better than most. What happened is smaller than a contest between styles. You came at me expecting a specific kind of resistance, because that's what 15 years of sparring partners taught your body to expect. I simply didn't give it to you. That's not a flaw in Judo. Every system, mine included, is built around certain assumptions about how an opponent will behave. The question isn't which system is superior. It's whether you're rigid enough to be predictable or adaptable enough not to be. The bigger man was quiet for a while, turning that over. 15 years, he said eventually, half to himself. 15 years, and I just got put on the floor by someone who never took a fighting stance. 15 years is not nothing, Bruce said. It's the reason your fall was clean, the reason you're not hurt, the reason you got back up and asked a real question instead of a defensive one. Most people who lose that fast lose their composure with it. You didn't. That matters more than the fall did. The bigger man looked down at his own hands, turning them over as though checking that they still belonged to him. I've beaten men bigger than you, he said, quieter now, less an argument than a confession. I've beaten men who trained twice as hard as I did, who had better instincts. I always understood how. There was always a why I could point to afterward. I read his hips wrong, or I was slower off the line, or my grip broke half a second too early. I can't find the why here. That's the part one can't put down. There's a why, Bruce said. You're just used to looking for it inside the exchange, inside the grip, the footwork, the split-second decisions once contact begins. This one lives earlier than that. It lives in what you expected to happen before you ever crossed the room. He tapped 2 fingers lightly against his own temple. You didn't lose the moment I moved. You lost the moment you decided, without knowing it, exactly how this was going to unfold. Everything after that was just your body keeping a promise your mind had already made. Be water. What would you have me do differently? The Judo man asked. There was no more edge in his voice, just the plain, slightly raw curiosity of someone who has just been handed proof that there's more to learn than he'd accounted for. Bruce thought about it. Don't stop being a judoka, he said. Judo gave you a foundation most people never build, but a foundation isn't a ceiling. Study what's outside it. Footwork from boxing, distance management from fencing, the way a strike changes the geometry of a grip. Absorb what's useful. Set aside what isn't. Keep what's specifically your own. He paused. Water takes the shape of whatever holds it, and it still cuts through stone given enough time. Rigid things break. Adaptable things last. Be water, the man repeated, testing the phrase. Something like that. He asked eventually if he could visit the school sometime, not to challenge anyone else, he said, almost sheepishly, but to actually learn. Bruce wrote an address on the back of a boarding pass stub and slid it across. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he said. Leave the belt at home. Everyone starts as a beginner there, even you. What was left behind? The flight was called not long after. Bruce gathered his jacket, his bag, his book, and walked toward the gate with the same unhurried pace he'd carried through the entire encounter. No different, no lighter, no heavier for what had just happened. To him, it seemed, this had simply been a conversation that happened to involve gravity. The Judo man sat where he was for a while after the crowd dispersed, turning the boarding pass stub over in his hands, running his thumb along the address written on the back. An older woman nearby, who'd watched the whole thing unfold from 2 rows over, leaned toward him. That was very brave of you, she said, to challenge him like that. He managed a smile, rueful laugh. It wasn't brave. It was foolish. There's a difference, and I only just learned it. She smiled and didn't argue. He did go back, eventually. Not that week, and not with much confidence, but he went. The story of what happened in that gate area followed him there before he arrived. Someone in the training hall had already heard some version of it, embellished a little more each time it was retold. The way these things always are. He didn't correct the exaggerations. He didn't need to. The true version, the 7 real seconds, was more than enough. The first few sessions were humbling in a different way than the airport had been. Slower, quieter, without an audience to make the humiliation sharp and memorable. Nobody there cared about his rank. Nobody bowed a little deeper because of the color of his belt. He was, for the first time in a decade, simply a student again, and it took him longer than he expected to stop resenting that and start enjoying it. Somewhere around the 3rd month, doing the same simple redirection drill for what felt like the 1000th time, something shifted. The same kind of quiet, wordless click he imagined must have happened for Bruce himself. Once, a long time before any of this. He kept competing in judo tournaments for years after that, and by his own account he never stopped being, at his core, judoka. But something in the way he moved had changed. Opponents who studied tape of his early matches against tape of his later ones sometimes remarked on it without quite being able to name what was different. A hesitation that used to be there before contact was gone. An economy in his setups that hadn't existed before. He never fully explained it to anyone outside his own school. Some lessons, he came to believe, lose something essential in translation. He trained there for years afterward, folding what he learned into what he already knew rather than discarding one for the other. Decades later, teaching his own students, he would sometimes tell the story of the afternoon a small man in an airport terminal took him apart in 7 seconds and then, instead of walking away, offered him a hand up and an address. People think the lesson was that I lost. He'd tell them, the lesson was what he did after I lost. He didn't need me to feel small to feel large himself. That's rarer than any throw I ever learned in 15 years of judo, and it's the only part of that afternoon I still think about every single day. Bruce Lee's actual philosophy, the emphasis on adaptability over rigid style, captured in his real writings and interviews about Jeet Kune Do, is well documented. The specific encounter above, however, is an invented story in the tradition of the many legendary Bruce Lee tales that circulate online. It did not happen as described and shouldn't be read as biography.